It began on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning where sunlight spilled gently across manicured lawns and the air smelled faintly of fresh, cut grass. In this neighborhood, silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. The HOA thrived on sameness, on lawns that looked cloned, on shutters that matched their neighbors like uniforms in an army. Peace here wasn't natural, it was imposed, maintained like a strict curfew. But at the corner house, there was something different, something alive, something that broke the silence in the most beautiful way. A black homeowner carried a tradition passed down for generations. Every Sunday, his backyard became a sanctuary. Speakers played gospel music, not blaring, not reckless, but rich, soulful, and deep. The kind of sound that wrapped itself around your heart and reminded you of something bigger than yourself. It was music that told stories of survival, of faith, of freedom. Music born in struggle, but lifted in hope. To his family, these mornings were sacred. They gathered together as the songs played, sharing breakfast, laughter, and memories. For them, it wasn't background noise. It was heritage, a heartbeat that carried the weight of ancestors who once sang to endure, and now sang to celebrate. But not everyone heard it that way. Across the street lived Karen. The HOA, self-appointed guardian, the one who believed rules existed to keep the neighborhood civilized. She was the type to measure grass with a ruler, to photograph garbage cans left out 2 minutes too long, to scowl if children rode bikes too fast on the sidewalks. And in her mind, gospel music on a Sunday morning was nothing less than rebellion. To Karen, silence equaled order, music equaled defiance, and defiance needed to be crushed. She had already tried the subtle ways. Letters slipped into mailboxes, warnings folded in thin white envelopes. Each carried the HOA seal, designed to intimidate. The first letter called the music a disturbance. The second threatened fines. By the third, her words dripped with venom. Cease immediately, or the HOA will take action. But every Sunday, like clockwork, the music returned. Smooth harmonies, clapping rhythms, voices that rose above fear. The homeowner never shouted back, never penned angry replies. He simply lived his tradition, unshaken, unbothered by Karen's crusade, and that calmness infuriated her more than anything. On one particular Sunday, the air was golden, the sun soft, the kind of morning that felt like peace itself. Birds sang from telephone wires. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically. And then, like a tide rising, the gospel music began. A voice, then a harmony, then instruments swelling, echoing down the street. Karen stood at her window, her coffee growing cold in her hand, her jaw tight. This wasn't music to her. This was disrespect. She yanked her sunglasses from the counter, grabbed her clipboard, the weapon she always carried, and stormed outside. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She marched straight into the homeowner's yard like it belonged to her. The grass bent beneath her heels, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a general carrying battle plans. She waved a stack of papers in the air. "This is a violation," she snapped, her voice slicing through the music. "This neighborhood is not zoned for noise disturbances. You are breaking the rules." The music kept playing. The homeowner stood near the porch, still, calm, steady. His face didn't twitch, his body didn't tense. He looked at her the way a stone looks at rain, unfazed, immovable. Her words fell flat. Her anger splashed uselessly against his silence. Karen mistook that silence for weakness. She smirked, confident she had won. After all, what could one man do against the HOA, against her? She left the yard with her shoulders high, already imagining the victory letter she would write, already rehearsing the smug satisfaction she would feel when the music stopped next Sunday. But what Karen didn't know was that this battle was never about noise. It wasn't about zoning. It wasn't even about rules. It was about something deeper, older, stronger. It was about dignity, about culture, about faith that had survived far worse than an angry woman with a clipboard. And across the street, inside a small church whose doors had always welcomed the broken and the faithful, something was stirring. Voices were preparing, hearts were readying, and Karen, blind in her arrogance, had no idea that she had just declared war on something she could never defeat. Because when you try to silence a song born from survival, you awaken a chorus. And this time, it would rise louder than she could ever imagine. The week after Karen's outburst carried a tension that the neighborhood could feel but not name. On the surface, everything looked the same. Sprinklers ticked, lawns were mowed, cars gleamed in driveways polished to perfection. But under it all, whispers stirred. Neighbors spoke in hushed voices while bringing in their mail. Children overheard their parents muttering about Karen's fight with the man on the corner. Some smiled quietly, secretly glad someone was bold enough to defy her. Others shook their heads, afraid of the chaos that might come. And through it all, the black homeowner stayed silent. Not a word spoken back to her threats, not a sign of anger. He simply carried on, as though her clipboard and her warnings were nothing more than passing storms. But behind closed doors, something was being planned. He had grown up in gospel, not just the music, but the spirit of it. He knew what it meant to sing when others wanted you silent. He knew how voices joined together could move mountains, tear down walls, and remind the world that no one could erase faith, no matter how hard they tried. And so, when Karen demanded silence, he didn't respond with arguments. He responded with an invitation. The following Saturday evening, a phone call was made to the local church. Then another, and another. Voices passed the message along like sparks spreading through dry fields. Come tomorrow. Bring your voices, bring your fire. By nightfall, word had reached the choir. These were not casual singers. They were men and women who had spent their lives lifting their voices in unity, who understood the power of harmony as protest, as prayer, as survival. They had sung at weddings, at funerals, in moments of sorrow and moments of joy. And when they heard what Karen had done, their answer was unanimous. We'll be there. Morning came. The sun rose over rooftops painted in soft pink and gold. Dew clung to blades of grass. The neighborhood stretched awake, expecting the usual quiet perfection. But at the corner house, preparations were already underway. The speakers stood tall, ready. A table was set with water and food, as though preparing for a gathering. Folding chairs lined the yard, not in neat rows but in a circle, a symbol that no one stood above another. And then they arrived. Cars pulled up one after another. Out stepped members of the choir, dressed not in uniforms, but in whatever they owned. Bright dresses, worn suits, shoes polished, some scuffed from years of use. Faces glowing, carrying the quiet strength of people who had seen storms before and learned to sing through them. Neighbors peeked through curtains, eyes widening. This wasn't just family. This was an army of voices. The homeowner greeted each of them with a nod, a handshake, a hug. And when the circle was complete, he stepped back and let them gather. Then the music began. It started soft, a single hum rolling like thunder before a storm. Then another voice joined, then another. A harmony built, thick, unshakable, resonant. The sound spread, filling the air with something alive, something electric. This wasn't noise, it wasn't disturbance, it was a force, and Karen, standing at her window across the street, froze. At first, she thought it was a trick. Maybe a few extra friends, maybe a louder speaker. But as the voices grew, rising and falling like waves, her face drained of color. This wasn't just him, this was dozens, a choir. Her heart pounded. She grabbed her phone, snapping photos, dialing numbers, firing off frantic texts to the HOA board. Her fingers shook as she typed words like violation and escalation. She demanded backup, demanded fines, demanded action. But no phone call, no clipboard, no threat could compete with what was happening outside. The choir's voices soared higher, stronger. Neighbors who had never spoken to the homeowner before began drifting out of their houses, drawn by the sound. Some stood quietly at the edge of their lawns, listening. Others smiled, nodding to the rhythm, clapping along softly. A few even joined in, their voices shaky but eager, blending into the harmony. And suddenly, the silence that Karen worshipped was gone. It wasn't destroyed by chaos. It wasn't broken by anger. It was replaced with joy, with history, with power that could not be legislated away. Karen stormed outside, her sunglasses flashing in the morning sun, her clipboard clutched so tight her knuckles whitened. She crossed the street in rapid, angry strides, ready to unleash every ounce of her fury. But the moment she set foot on the lawn, the music shifted, it grew louder. The choir leaned in, clapping their hands, stomping their feet, raising their arms. The sound rose like a wave about to crash, and in that swell of voices, her words sharp, venomous, prepared were drowned before they could even leave her mouth. For the first time, Karen wasn't the loudest in the room. For the first time, her power, her precious HOA authority meant nothing. She stood there, trembling, her face flushed with rage, but no one stopped singing. No one even looked at her. She was irrelevant, a shadow against the light of something greater. And as the song reached its peak, the choir's voices seemed to carry a message not spoken but deeply understood. You cannot silence us. Not now. Not ever. Karen turned sharply, her heels crunching against the pavement, and stormed back across the street. She slammed her door, her windows rattling in protest. But the music didn't stop. It rose higher, echoing through every street, bouncing off every rooftop. It carried into the morning air like a declaration, like a banner waving unseen. We are here. We belong, and no rule, no paper, no threat will take that away. By the time the sun reached its peak, the neighborhood was no longer the quiet, rigid block it had once been. It was alive, breathing, singing, pulsing with energy. Every hymn that left the choir's lips carried not just sound but defiance, not just melody but memory. The block itself had transformed. Lawns that once looked identical now looked like a festival ground. Families had dragged out folding chairs. Children played in the street, their laughter dancing between the harmonies. Elderly neighbors, some leaning on canes, sat on porches with tears streaming down their cheeks. This wasn't just music anymore. This was community being reborn in real time, but for Karen it was a nightmare. Inside her house, blinds snapped shut and phone lines burned. She called the HOA president, demanding immediate enforcement. She called city officials, twisting her words to paint the gathering as unlawful noise and public disruption. She even dialed the police, her voice shrill with desperation, and then she waited. Minutes later, 2 HOA board members arrived, walking stiffly up the street in their neatly pressed polos and khakis, their expressions stern but uncertain. They weren't prepared for what they saw: a choir, neighbors clapping, children dancing, and not a single ounce of chaos or danger. Just life. Karen rushed out to meet them, clipboard in hand like a weapon. She gestured furiously at the choir. Do you see this? This is a violation. Noise ordinances, HOA rules, this is unacceptable. Shut it down now. But the board members didn't move. They stood frozen, their ears caught by the sound. One of them shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking from Karen to the crowd. The other took a deep breath, and for the first time, Karen realized something terrifying. Even they were moved. Before she could push them further, a new sound pierced the air: sirens. Karen's chest lifted in triumph. The police were here. Finally, someone with authority, someone who would restore her control. 2 squad cars rolled to a stop. Officers stepped out, their faces neutral, scanning the scene. Karen rushed to them, waving her clipboard wildly. Officers, thank God you're here. These people are disturbing the peace. They're violating HOA codes. But the officer held up a hand. Ma'am, we got a noise complaint. Yes, from me? Karen snapped, her voice echoing. This circus is illegal. They're breaking rules. You have to stop them. The officer turned to look at the choir. For a long moment, he said nothing. The harmonies continued, voices layered in rich, rolling waves. The song wasn't aggressive. It wasn't violent. It was uplifting, peaceful, profoundly spiritual. The officers exchanged glances. Finally, the older officer spoke. Ma'am, this is a church choir. Karen sputtered. I don't care if it's a choir. It's noise. It's against the rules. The officer's tone hardened. This is freedom of worship. This is protected. Unless you want to explain to the department why you're trying to shut down a church choir singing on private property, I suggest you step back. Karen's jaw fell open. Her face flushed red. "You can't be serious." But the officer was serious, dead serious. He turned his back to her and nodded respectfully at the homeowner. "Sir, you're within your rights. Carry on." The choir erupted in cheers mid-song, voices climbing even higher, as though the decision itself fueled them. Neighbors clapped louder, children danced harder, and the homeowner finally allowed himself the smallest smile. Karen's control the rules, the fines, the threats had just been shattered by something she could never fight. The law, the community, and the spirit of something greater than her clipboard. Her hands trembled as she lowered the board, her authority reduced to nothing more than paper in the wind. The HOA board members avoided her gaze. The officers returned to their cars, and Karen stood alone, drowning in the sound of a community that no longer feared her. The choir finished their song with a thunderous final note that echoed down the street like a declaration of victory. Applause erupted, neighbors hugging one another, some crying, some laughing. It wasn't just music anymore. It was liberation. From that day forward, every Sunday became a tradition bigger than one man and his stereo. The choir returned week after week, joined by more voices, more neighbors, more families. What started as resistance became celebration. The block transformed from rigid silence into a sanctuary where gospel filled the air like oxygen, and Karen, she never walked the street the same way again. Her clipboard lost its power. Her threats were nothing but empty noise. She had tried to silence music, and in doing so, she had awakened something far louder, far stronger, a community unafraid to sing. The memory of that day lingered like a scar she could never hide. Every note she heard reminded her of her defeat, of the moment she realized that perfection without soul was nothing but emptiness. Because some songs cannot be silenced. Some voices cannot be erased, and no Karen, no Hoa, no rulebook will ever drown out the sound of freedom,